storm Dorian is now passing through the western part of Newfoundland and eastern Quebec, so we are tracking that. But let's get back to Nova Scotia here. You say people are out and about because they've been cooped up for the last couple of days. What type of challenge does that create, though, for officials? Because they're still trying to get power up and running. They're still trying to clear the streets right now.
Yeah, so this is something that was brought up. This was the main message, essentially, at a news conference that was scheduled and took place about an hour or so ago, perhaps 2 hours ago, with all of the emergency measures officers, people from RCMP, local police, military, emergency measures officers, fire as well. They said their main message, stay off the roads, because the crews, like the big trucks you see behind me, as well as more of the observational and kind of information gathering crews are going around to see which areas have the most need. And so at that news conference, they specifically said there have been traffic jams around Tim Hortons locations that are open. There's not many of them. I think there's 2 that are open that I've seen, and there were dozens of cars, if not hundreds of cars. I tweeted a video of it, not to cross platforms, Facebook and Twitter, but if you take a look at my Twitter feed, there is just a gridlock around Tim Hortons. They specifically said, we don't want to see that. That gridlock blocked emergency measures officers from doing their jobs. So even if you want your coffee, stay off the roads, stay home unless it is an emergency. That was the main message from emergency measures officers at this afternoon's news conference.
Okay. Oh, well, let's bring in a first question here, because as we say, we are reaching out to our viewers and to the CBC followers on different social media platforms to ask their questions. And I'm going to begin here with a question that we're getting from Barb. And I don't know if you actually can answer this one, Brett, but she's asking about the amount of rain that has fallen in the areas affected by the storm. Just how much rain has fallen?
Well, the forecasted amount was 200 millimeters. That was what Environment Canada had forecasted to come along. I don't think that we received 200 millimeters in total. I think it was less than that. I don't know the exact amount, unfortunately, but it was less than 200 millimeters. It was still a significant amount of water, though. One of the main issues wasn't necessarily all that rain. It was more so the rain mixed with the storm surge. So the water level at the ocean side rose significantly. So we saw along coastal areas boats that came up because the wharf had reached its limitation. The water had come to the level of the wharf, and so the boats were moving around quite significantly, bashing against one another. So that was one of the main concerns or areas of concern, was that storm surge. And as for rainfall, accumulations or flooding, I haven't seen very much here in Nova Scotia so far, and so it's rainfall was less of an issue in this part of the East Coast as the wind was. So as you can see behind me, the wind was significant in causing damage here in this part of Halifax. Michael. Okay,
so another question here, this one from a different platform where we're being watched, and this is from the YouTube page. Andisha Newton, and excuse me if I've not pronounced that correctly, but Andisha is asking, will schools be open tomorrow?
Great question. So that was asked at the news conference a short time ago. There is the anticipation that universities will likely be open. That decision hasn't been made yet, but the local staff, the local city crews weren't able to answer that at that news conference. So while we answer questions, I might look it up, in fact, to see if there's any update, but there hasn't been any notification as to whether or not the Halifax Regional Centre for Education will be opening schools, whether other boards might be opening or closing, or it might be on a school-by-school basis, because we've seen, at least throughout the city, some streets that look like this, some streets completely untouched. So we've seen roofs off in some areas, so it might be a decision on a school-by-school basis that could be made tonight or even tomorrow morning as well. So no clear answer yet as to whether there is a blanket decision about schools being open or closed.
Yeah, it might be worthwhile for people to check in with their individual school boards, and if it's a post-secondary education institution, to actually reach out to them. Brett, I want to bring in another question here. This is from Sue Hamilton on YouTube. I have some numbers here, which I think we might be able to answer this one, because Sue Hamilton on YouTube is asking how many are without power. Brett, correct me if you have different numbers, but the latest numbers that we have from Nova Scotia Power says about 335,000 customers are still without power. On PEI, some 54,000, and in New Brunswick, some 51,000. And we're now slowly getting in some reports that power is also being affected in western Newfoundland, though, of course, those numbers keep fluctuating. So tell us a bit more about the power situation and how that has been progressing throughout the day.
So I would say that this is the biggest story of the day with power, and we'll likely get more questions about it. If you have more questions about it, you can post it on the platform that you're watching this on. The latest number as of right now, 320,025 customers are currently without power. So 320,000, that was down from around 400,000 earlier today. That's in Nova Scotia alone. And so there's been significant gains made. Lots of people, thousands of people, have been put back on the grid. Now, the issue is that sometimes, depending on what the circumstances are, they have to remove some people off the grid to then make the repairs and then put everyone back on the grid that way. There is also the fact that crews need to go to the locations, determine what the damage is, what repairs need to be made, and then make those fixes. Now, we heard from Nova Scotia Power, and they said that they are looking to first resolve the areas or the problems with the largest customer base. So if they can make a small repair that puts thousands of people back on the grid, they're going to prioritize those issues first. They are unfortunately not going to be going to the areas that have one or two customers to try to resolve those immediately. Those will be lower priorities compared to the fixes that could see thousands of people put back on the grid. It's kind of a utilitarian solution to this mass outage, this outage that's being called the worst in Nova Scotia's history for Nova Scotia Power, but it is the solution that they are determining. Keep in mind one more thing about Nova Scotia Power, about that number, 320,000 customers without power. That is 320,000 homes and businesses. In those homes, you could have 2 or 3 or 4 people possibly. And so the actual number of people affected, people without power, is significantly greater than 320,000.
Okay, so we'll keep tracking those numbers because, as you say, they keep improving. In fact, the numbers I read was from early this hour, so you have some 40 minutes later, and already we're seeing improvement. So that, I guess, is the good news here, although still a big challenge. Another question here we're getting from Maggie Archibald on Facebook. And Maggie, I'm actually going to thank you personally as well, because you've been very kind of sending me some videos that you have taken through my Twitter account, so thank you to you. But Maggie Archibald on Facebook is asking this question, Brett. Are there any reports of cell towers down because cell service has been slow or not working? Wondering what you're hearing about that, because of course we are hearing that cell service is a challenge right now through the affected parts of the Atlantic region.
Okay, so this is definitely an issue. This is something that has been talked about a lot on social media, and that we've been experiencing here in the operation of, broadcasting everyone watching at home the news, because there have been problems with cell phone service, whether it be data, whether it be voice. This has been confirmed by emergency measures officers. This is the case at least for Nova Scotia, for Halifax rather. Not sure broadly in Nova Scotia if it's as much of an issue, but the emergency measures officers at the news conference said, yes, we're aware of this. It is an issue. It is meaning that there are pockets of the region of Halifax where you simply can't get data. Or the data is significantly slower than it should be. They were not able to confirm whether or not any transmission towers, those cell phone towers with those long rectangular gray boxes, were damaged, but they did say, hey, listen, those boxes need power, and if there's no power to the boxes and the battery system or the backup generator system isn't working, then they won't be transmitting that critical data that many people need. And so, yes, it's a problem. CBC News has not been able to get answers from companies like Bell or Rogers or Eastlink or TELUS. We've asked emergency measures officers to reach out to them as well. They said, yeah, we'll try to get in touch with them too. So no real answers there, except the acknowledgement that yes, there certainly is a problem with certain pockets of this region in terms of getting data on your phone.
Okay. One more question here, and this is from from a user who goes by the handle Will Smith, although I'm going to venture to say it's not the Fresh Prince of Bel-Air that we're talking about here. But Will Smith does have this question on Facebook. Where and how bad was the worst damage incurred, is how he writes it.
That's a good question. It depends on what you think of as worst damage, because the first answer could be, situations like this. So this is a street where you have the power out and you could have a significant amount of food that you lose in your refrigerator, and there could be significant costs involved with that. That could be one type of damage. There's another part of the city where there are trees going through people's homes, trees that are going into the windows and just the roofs being collapsed a little bit. That's a particularly bad area. There's also areas along the coast as well. So there are boats that are damaged. There's certain wharfs and decks that are damaged there. So it really depends on how you measure the damage quotient, basically, to see where the most damage occurred. But if you take a look generally at the location where the damage was, it kind of followed the anticipated path of the hurricane. So the hurricane hit around the Sambro area, which is just kind of to the west and to the south of Halifax proper, and it moved its way across the province from there. So places like Yarmouth and places like Eastern Cape Breton, a little bit further from that main center line, perhaps got less damage, and most of the damage is centered in that main path that the hurricane passed along. So it definitely was a direct hit for the Halifax region, which is why you see much of the damage here.
Yeah, well, let's talk about direct hit, because as you say, the Halifax really bore the brunt of this storm. And this next comment from a YouTube user by the name of Veritas, again, this is on YouTube: did it hit PEI at all? And, without a doubt, PEI sustained damage in this storm, although not from the eye.
No, yeah, so it definitely hit PEI in terms of you still experienced wind and rain on Prince Edward Island for sure. But the eye would have skirted along the eastern side of Prince Edward Island as it went across. So it depends on what you define as hit. Yes, they absolutely saw significant wind, significant rainfall as well. But if it technically went over Prince Edward Island, went across the island as it went across the province of Nova Scotia, no. But that's not saying they didn't receive hurricane strength winds and hurricane strength rainfall either. One question back, Michael, before we just move ahead, before Will Smith's question about the Halifax School Board, they said no decision yet, according to the Halifax School Board's Centre for Education's Twitter feed. They say just keep tuned into the website as well as the Twitter feed to see if public schools are open tomorrow.
Okay, so good to know. The breaking news as it happens right here on News Network, Brett. I have to ask you, because we have a couple of minutes left, and I want to ask you a couple of questions myself. First and foremost, what was it like for you? You've been reporting from officials, but talk to us about your firsthand account of what happened last night as the storm passed.
Well, I was working the mornings, both yesterday morning and this morning, so I was not standing out in it as many people on Twitter hoped I would be, oddly. And so I was at home, and we lost power. My wife and I lost power around 3 p.m. and didn't have power until around 7 a.m. this morning. And so it was a little bit scary because from our apartment you could see that there is significant wind, significant rain. You could hear the howling of the wind and the rain kind of pelting the window. And so we knew that there was damage that could occur because from our window you could actually see one of the apartment buildings in which the roof had peeled off, taken flight, flown across the street, flipped over, landed on 2 cars. So we could see flashing lights in the distance there as that situation was being handled. And I was looking on social media saying, oh, that's what's happening over there. That's what could happen. Those are some of the risks associated with this storm. But in our particular case, no damage and no issues other than the power outage. And we are lucky that we live in kind of downtown, that we had our power restored this morning, whereas some people, like the ones you see behind me, still don't have power.
Yeah, okay, listen, Brett, we only have about 20 seconds left before our window closes here on News Network. But just to promo, your conversation does continue on the social media platform, so people can reach out to you on that, correct?
That's right. So Facebook, YouTube as well. You can tune in there.
Thank you. Okay, Brett, thank you. Headlines are next.
Perfect. I'm going to pull you out of my ear. I'm doing the Facebook Live right now, right? I'm going to continue on. Okay, thanks, guys. Okay, if you're tune in on Facebook Live still, I'm chatting with the control room as we wrap up that portion of the live hit. Chatting with Michael. Thanks to the folks who posted questions and who posted comments on the YouTube page as well as the Facebook page. And so thank you if you're tuning in just now to the Facebook live post. So I'm going to hang up that and let's talk. Okay, so I talked about a couple of the different things that were discussed on the hurricane update that happened a couple of hours ago. And so the if we take a look, sorry, just looking at a couple of things, there we go. If we take a look at some of the topics that were discussed, we talked about Nova Scotia Power. We talked about the 360 or so, 360,000, 320,000 now customers who are without power. That number has been dropping significantly since this morning. So crews are here from all over the East Coast. We heard from Nova Scotia Power that they are here from Maine, the state of Maine, down south of the border, as well as Ontario, as well as New Brunswick, I think, as well. The interesting thing is that many of the crews that are coming here to try to help out the Nova Scotia Power crews who are already working are actually coming from the southern United States because they were deployed there when Hurricane Dorian was making landfall there across Florida, across South Carolina, Georgia, those states along there. And so they are going from working to restore power in the southern United States up to working to restore power here in Nova Scotia. And so we have to commend them because, again, this crew is here from, that you see behind me, is here from Ontario working. And while it is sunny and nice right now, it can get cold and dark very quickly, and they'll be working around the clock to try to restore electricity to residents all across the province. So let's take a look at a couple of questions that we have. Jerry Allen, thank you for posting to Facebook. How is the water damage on the coastline? So the water damage was significant in some areas, kind of depends on where you're looking. So for example, we saw images on social media of the Dartmouth waterfront being completely submerged. So for example, not completely submerged, but the King's Wharf area right on the waterfront with the Dartmouth lettering there, the water had risen all the way up to only show the lettering instead of just that spit of land, so it rose significantly. There's also been some damage on the Halifax side as well. We've seen pictures of the Halifax boardwalk with boards burst out from the area. For example, along the area where there's the pilot ships, the pilot boats, where they line up there. There are boards that are burst out because the water, as it came up, the turbulent water and the waves were hitting up and up, and as the storm surge rose the average water level, the waves popped those boards up, and so that's some damage that Develop Nova Scotia, as well as the people responsible for the Halifax boardwalk, are going to be having to deal with. That's only in the Halifax area. There's been significant damage elsewhere also to regions kind of in the Sambro area where we saw the direct hit there. And so Herring Cove also saw some areas of damage, mostly to wharfs though, wharfs and docks and decks, because less so much with houses on the waterfront, but we saw mostly just some issues there with in terms of water damage. Let's see who else has some questions here. We have Dwight Lush, thank you very much for asking a question. How about Cape Breton damage? So if you take a look at the storm, thank you very much, Dwight. If you take a look at the storm and the track that it took from its direct hit on Halifax across the province and then making its way, kind of skirting between Prince Edward Island and Western Cape Breton. The western side of Cape Breton is the area that saw the most damage and the most impact, basically. And because of the direction of the wind and the areas to the east of the eye of the storm, which would be Cape Breton in this case, Western Cape Breton, saw mostly wind. And then on the western side, you see mostly rain. So it was a mostly wind event for Western Cape Breton, and it was that westerly side of the island that saw the most impact. And so that's what we're seeing. That's what we saw there. So thank you very much, Dwight, for that question. Let's take one more. Cheryl Simpson on YouTube, thank you very much for commenting, asking a question. Where is Dorian now? Well, it's been really interesting to see. So if you take a look and watch our coverage on CBC News Network on TV or a CBC Gem, you can see that we are now interviewing people who are in Newfoundland and who are dealing with the effects of this storm. And so it is right now in the western Newfoundland area. It passed over the Magdalen Islands earlier this morning. It is in the western Newfoundland area now, causing lots of wind, lots of rain as well. So very similar conditions to what we saw here, perhaps just slightly less strong because it did go overland, lose a bit of power, a bit of steam as it headed across there and then across the strait to that to that other province, to Newfoundland. And so yes, they are feeling the impact now in Newfoundland, the western side of Newfoundland. Then the storm is going to continue on, head out to sea, and it's going to dissipate from there as it heads north, loses steam, loses some of that fuel that it was using, the warmer waters that we saw to accumulate that power down south when it was, remember, a Category 5 hurricane. And so it's going to pass western Newfoundland now and head out to sea and likely dissipate from then on. So that is pretty much concludes our Facebook Live event. Thank you very much. This doesn't mean that our coverage ends, obviously. You can tune into CBC News Network all night long, all day long, either on television, you can stream it online, or go to CBC Gem to watch it on your Apple TV or other devices like that. Also, we have full coverage on CBCNews.ca, CBC Nova Scotia. You can go to your various provincial pages to get full coverage, full local, regional coverage. And then you can also watch us on Facebook and Twitter. So thank you very much for tuning in, and have a great day. Thanks.